On a cold Thursday morning in February of 1987, a banker named Richard Holloway stood in the middle of 160 acres of western Kansas farmland and declared it worthless. Not technically worthless, just not worth much. That was the language bankers used when they wanted to insult you without sounding rude. Daniel Mercer stood across from him with his hands buried in the pockets of his father's old work coat. 3 months earlier, his father had died of a heart attack, 58 years old, gone before sunrise. Now Daniel owned 160 acres, a farmhouse that leaked when it rained, and land everyone in the county seemed to agree wasn't worth much anymore. Richard glanced down at his appraisal sheet. Based on current productivity and comparable sales, we're valuing the property at $82,000. Daniel looked across the frozen field. $82,000. His father had spent 37 years working this ground. 37 years. And according to the bank, that lifetime of work wasn't worth much more than a decent house in town. You disagree? Richard asked. Daniel bent down, scooped up a handful of soil, and rubbed it between his fingers. No. The banker looked surprised. No? I think you're being generous. Richard laughed. That's a first. Most people think their land is worth more than it is. Daniel let the dirt fall back to the ground. Most people don't know what land is worth. The banker smiled. Neither do you. Maybe he was right. But Daniel wasn't thinking about the appraisal. He was thinking about something his father had told him 12 years earlier. A lesson that sounded ridiculous at the time. A lesson that would eventually make this land more valuable than gold. Because the story starts in the summer of 1975. Daniel was 22. His father, Samuel Mercer, was 50, and they were standing in the middle of the same field arguing about dirt. Samuel bent down, grabbed a handful of soil, and asked a question. What do you see? Dirt. His father smiled. That's why most farmers stay broke. Daniel rolled his eyes. What does that even mean? Samuel opened his hand. Most people spend their lives harvesting crops. He pointed at the ground. The smart ones harvest land. Daniel laughed. You can't harvest land. Sure you can. Samuel squeezed the soil. You improve it. At the time, Daniel thought his father was speaking in riddles. The Mercer farm wasn't impressive. The house was old. The equipment was older. Their best tractor had more repairs than original parts. Nothing about the operation looked wealthy. Meanwhile, neighboring farmers were expanding, buying bigger combines, bigger tractors, more acreage, more debt. The entire farming world seemed obsessed with growth. And for a while it worked. Land prices climbed. Crop prices climbed. Banks handed out loans. Equipment dealers couldn't keep inventory on the lot. Everybody wanted more. Everybody wanted bigger. Everybody believed the good times would last forever. Everybody except Samuel Mercer. While other farmers chased yields, Samuel chased something else. Soil. He planted cover crops after harvest. He rotated fields differently. He left certain acres to recover instead of forcing another crop out of them. The neighbors thought he was crazy. One farmer asked him a question over coffee one morning. Why would you plant something you're not even going to sell? Samuel shrugged. Because I'm not farming for this year. The farmer laughed. Samuel didn't. That was the thing about him. He never argued. He just kept working, year after year, quietly improving the ground beneath his feet. Nobody noticed, at least not then. Then the 1980s arrived, and everything changed. Interest rates exploded. Grain prices collapsed. Land values began falling. The same farmers who had borrowed heavily during the boom years suddenly found themselves trapped. Every month another auction sign appeared. Every season another family disappeared from the county. The crisis hit hard. Then it hit harder. Harold Brewer lost his farm. Gene Whitfield lost his. Others followed. Men who had spent decades building operations watched them vanish in a matter of months. And through all of it, Samuel kept repeating the same thing. The land doesn't care about market prices. Daniel never fully understood what he meant. Not until after his father died. The funeral was small, the kind where people keep saying, "Good man," because they don't know how else to describe someone who mattered. A few weeks later, Daniel finally walked into his father's workshop. The place still smelled like oil, coffee, and sawdust. His father's gloves were still on the bench. His jacket still hung on the wall. Everything looked exactly the way Samuel had left it. Daniel started cleaning, not because he wanted to, because he needed something to do. Then he found a notebook, old, worn, hidden beneath a stack of receipts in the bottom drawer. At first he thought it was a diary. It wasn't. It was something much more valuable. For over 20 years, Samuel Mercer had recorded everything: rainfall, moisture levels, organic matter, crop rotations, soil conditions, field performance, page after page, year after year. The notebook wasn't about crops. It was about the land itself. Samuel had been studying the farm like a scientist, documenting every improvement, tracking every change, building a road map nobody else knew existed. Then Daniel reached the final pages and found a note written in his father's handwriting. The ink looked newer, probably written shortly before he died. It said, "The land is better than it looks. I've been building it for you. Don't let anyone tell you it's just dirt. Trust the soil. It won't let you down." Daniel sat there staring at those words. For the first time, everything made sense. His father hadn't been trying to maximize profits. He'd been building an asset. While everyone else focused on this year's crop, Samuel had focused on the next 20 years. And suddenly Daniel understood something most people never do. Wealth isn't always visible. Sometimes wealth is hidden underground. That spring, Daniel made a decision. He would keep farming. Not because it was easy, because it was right. He followed his father's methods, the same rotations, the same cover crops, the same patience, the same discipline. The results weren't dramatic at first, but they were consistent. When dry years hit, his fields held moisture longer. When yields dropped elsewhere, his fields remained productive. When neighboring farms struggled, the Mercer farm endured. Then something unexpected happened. Land prices collapsed. An opportunity arrived disguised as disaster. Auction signs began appearing everywhere. Families were forced to sell. Banks were desperate. Nobody had cash. Nobody except Daniel. While others had borrowed, he had saved. While others expanded with debt, he expanded with patience. So he started buying one parcel, then another, then another. Not because he was rich, because he was prepared. The same crisis destroying other farms was creating opportunities for the few people strong enough to survive it. By 1988, Daniel owned 600 acres, all paid for. No debt, no banker, no monthly payments, just land, good land, improving land, land that produced value every single year. Then one afternoon Richard Holloway came back, the same banker who had appraised the Mercer farm. He found Daniel working in the shop. "I heard you bought the Whitfield place." Daniel nodded. "And Brewer's?" "That's right." Richard looked confused. "How?" "Cash." The banker stared. "No loans?" "No loans." Silence filled the workshop. Finally, Richard asked the question, "What did I miss?" Daniel looked out toward the fields, then at the banker. "You thought wealth was money." Richard frowned. "Isn't it?" Daniel shook his head. "No." He pointed toward the land. "Money comes and goes. Crops come and go. Markets come and go. But productive land keeps working." The banker said nothing. Daniel continued. "My father used to say gold sits in a vault." He paused. "Land gets up every spring and goes back to work." Richard looked out across the Mercer acres. For the first time, he wasn't seeing dirt. He was seeing something else. An asset that produced food. An asset that generated income. An asset that survived recessions, inflation, market crashes, and bad decisions. An asset nobody could manufacture more of. And suddenly the appraisal from the year before seemed ridiculous, because the bank had valued the land based on what it was. Samuel Mercer had valued it based on what it could become. That's the untold truth about farm wealth. The richest farmers aren't always the ones with the newest machinery, or the biggest houses, or the largest loans. Sometimes they're the ones quietly improving an acre every year while nobody is paying attention. Because wealth isn't always measured by what you harvest. Sometimes it's measured by what you build. Samuel Mercer understood that. Daniel eventually understood it, too. And that's why a piece of Kansas farmland once dismissed as nearly worthless became the foundation of a fortune. Not because the family struck gold, because they owned something better. They owned land. And unlike gold, land can feed a family, support a community, generate income, and grow more valuable with every passing year. The world spends a lot of time chasing shiny things, stocks, trends, markets, speculation. But generation after generation, the people who understood land kept learning the same lesson. Gold can preserve wealth. Land can create it. And that is why the most valuable thing on the Mercer farm was never the tractor, never the grain bins, never the farmhouse. It was the dirt beneath their boots, the thing everybody else overlooked, until it became impossible to ignore.